When Emily's 7th birthday arrived, she was more excited than ever. After all, she had been dreaming of this day for months. Her family wasn't particularly wealthy, but they always managed to make her feel special on her birthday. This year, her parents had promised her a surprise gift, one she would never forget. The anticipation built as she counted down the days, her mind filled with wild guesses and possibilities. On the morning of her birthday, Emily woke up early, her heart pounding with excitement. She rushed downstairs to the kitchen, where her mother was already preparing breakfast. There, sitting on the table, was a small, delicate package wrapped in pale pink paper. It was a square box, not too big, but big enough to spark curiosity. A ribbon tied in a neat bow held the wrapping together, and there was a tag attached that simply read, "For Emily." Her mother smiled warmly as Emily's eyes widened. "Go ahead," she said. "It's your special day." Emily's small fingers quickly tore away the wrapping, revealing the box beneath. She carefully lifted the lid, and inside was a doll. It wasn't like the dolls she already owned, the ones with stiff plastic hair and painted faces. This one was different. Its porcelain face was flawless, its eyes a deep, almost haunting shade of blue. But what caught Emily's attention most was the doll's hair. It wasn't the usual synthetic hair that most dolls had. It was real, fine, brown, and silky, cascading down its back in perfect strands. Her breath caught in her throat. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Her mother looked at the doll with a faint smile. "I thought you'd like it. It's a very special one." Emily clutched the doll to her chest, feeling an odd sense of connection to it. The doll's hair, silky and lifelike, seemed to shimmer in the light. It was strange, though. The hair wasn't just beautiful. It felt almost alive, as though it were responding to her touch. That night, as Emily prepared for bed, she placed the doll on her nightstand beside her. She gazed at it for a moment, feeling a curious sensation tug at her. There was something almost unsettling about its perfect, unblinking eyes. But she shook off the feeling, tucked herself under the covers, and drifted into sleep. The next morning, when Emily woke, the first thing she noticed was the doll. Its hair, which had been neatly styled the night before, now cascaded past its shoulders, longer than it had been when she first received it. At first, she thought it was simply the way the doll had been positioned, but the more she looked at it, the more she realized something was wrong. The hair wasn't supposed to grow. It was a doll after all. Her heart skipped a beat, and a chill crawled up her spine. She reached out cautiously and brushed her fingers through the doll's hair. It felt just as real as it had the day before, but it was longer, much longer. "Mom," she called, a hint of worry in her voice. "Come look at this." Her mother came into the room, a look of surprise crossing her face as she took in the sight of the doll's now long hair. She had seen it last night when they tucked Emily into bed, and it had been much shorter then. "Well, that's strange," her mother murmured, leaning in closer. "Maybe it's just the way the hair was styled." But Emily wasn't convinced. The doll's hair seemed to have grown overnight, as if it had a life of its own. And as she touched it again, she felt that strange, unsettling sensation deep in her chest. Her mother gently patted her on the head. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Maybe it's just part of the magic of the doll." But that night, After Emily had gone to bed, the doll's hair grew even longer, and this time it had an even stranger quality. As Emily lay in her bed, trying to sleep, she could have sworn she heard faint whispers, soft and barely audible, coming from the direction of her nightstand. The sounds were fleeting, just the rustle of hair, the faintest giggle, but they sent a shiver down her spine. Over the following days, the hair continued to grow. Emily's parents, concerned by how rapidly it was lengthening, took the doll to a local toy store, hoping to find an explanation. The store clerk, a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, examined the doll closely. She looked up at Emily's parents, her expression unreadable. "I'm afraid I've never seen anything like this," she said. "There are rumors, old stories about dolls like this one. I would be cautious." Her mother, dismissing the clerk's words as superstition, took the doll back home, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As the days passed, the doll's hair grew even more rapidly. Each time Emily would check on it, the hair would be longer, brushing against the floor and growing thicker with every passing hour. It was as though the doll was feeding off the very air around it. One evening after school, Emily's father decided to take action. He picked up the doll, held it firmly by the waist, and grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen drawer. "Enough is enough," he muttered, determined to solve the mystery once and for all. With a swift motion, he snipped off a large portion of the doll's hair. It fell to the floor in neat strands, and for a moment, Emily felt a sense of relief. But that relief was short-lived. The next morning, the doll's hair had regrown to its full length as if nothing had ever happened. Her parents were stunned. "What is going on?" her mother asked, her voice filled with concern. But no answer came. The doll's hair continued to grow, and with it, the unease in Emily's heart deepened. As the weeks went on, the doll's presence in the room grew more and more unsettling. The whispers became clearer, and Emily began to feel as though something was watching her every moment. Late at night, she would wake to find the doll's eyes fixed on her, unblinking and cold. She could no longer ignore the feeling that the doll was alive in a way that no toy should be. And then one night, as Emily lay awake, unable to sleep, she noticed something even more horrifying. As she looked over at the doll, she saw that its hair had changed again. This time, it was different. The hair wasn't just longer, it was thicker, darker, almost matted together in places. And there, hidden among the strands, was something else. A small, round shape that looked out of place, like a hidden bump beneath the hair. Emily's heart raced. She reached out to touch it, and as her fingers brushed against the scalp, she felt something wrong. The smooth porcelain of the doll's head had begun to crack in places, and beneath it, she could feel the warmth of skin. Real skin. Flesh. Her pulse quickened, and she quickly backed away from the doll, her breath coming in short gasps. She knew, deep down, that whatever was happening was no longer just a strange coincidence. The doll was no longer a toy. It was something far more sinister. And as Emily stared at the doll in terror, she realized that she wasn't just looking at a toy anymore. She was staring at something far darker, something with a mind of its own. The night grew cold, and the doll's hair grew longer still. And as Emily tried to pull the blanket over her head, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a scalp being tugged, twisted, and something deeper underneath, something that had never been there before. days passed, and despite the terror that had begun to grip Emily's heart, life in the house continued as it always had. The doll was placed on her nightstand every night, its long hair hanging over the edge. Yet, no matter how much time passed or how many times her parents tried to cut the hair, it always grew back. At first, Emily's mother dismissed it, saying it was just an oddity, something the company had designed to make the doll seem lifelike. But the longer the hair grew, the more unsettled Emily felt. It wasn't just the lengthening of the hair that disturbed her, it was the fact that it seemed to grow faster with every passing day. No sooner would her parents trim it than it would return, longer and thicker than before. After a few days of this, Emily began to notice something even stranger. The hair had begun to feel different. At first, it had been silky and soft, but now it felt thicker, almost like real human hair. She could feel the strands between her fingers, cold to the touch and slightly damp, as though they were breathing. Her father had become increasingly frustrated with the doll's relentless growth. One night, while Emily was doing her homework, he sat in the living room, the doll resting on his knee. He was holding a pair of scissors, his jaw set in determination. He had already snipped the hair several times, but now it seemed almost like a futile task. He looked at the doll's lifeless face and gritted his teeth, resolving to get to the bottom of this madness. With a swift motion, he began cutting again. Snip, snip, snip. The hair fell to the floor in neat clumps, but just as quickly as it had been cut, it began to grow back. Emily watched from the doorway, her stomach twisting in fear. She could hear her father muttering to himself, cursing under his breath. The hair grew faster now, impossibly fast, as if mocking him. "Dad," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "It's happening again." Her father stopped, a look of disbelief crossing his face. The doll's hair had already begun to grow back, stretching down over its shoulders once more. He looked up at Emily, his expression hardening. "I don't understand it," he muttered. "This isn't normal. It's like it's alive." But his words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she watched her father try and fail to cut the hair again. "We need to get rid of it," Emily whispered, but her voice was barely audible. Her father hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "We can't just throw it away. We don't know what's going on with it. I'll take it back to the store. Maybe the clerk knows something we don't." But when he returned to the toy store, the clerk wasn't there. Only a few other customers who looked at him curiously but said nothing. The place felt strangely empty, and the air seemed thick, as though something unseen was waiting just out of sight. He searched the store, his eyes scanning every shelf, but there was no sign of the gray-haired woman who had warned him. Desperate for an explanation, he took the doll to a local antiques shop. The proprietor, an old man with a hunched back, examined it with quiet interest, his fingers brushing over the doll's delicate features. "It's not a regular doll, is it?" he said, his voice low and rasping. "This one's got a history, not a good one either. You'll want to be careful with that." "What do you mean?" her father asked, his voice tight with frustration. The man looked around, his gaze darting over his shoulder, and then he leaned in closer. "There's an old story. Some say it's cursed, others think it's something much worse. But once a doll like this takes root in your home, it doesn't let go, not easily." Her father's stomach turned. What are you talking about? I just want to get rid of it. The shopkeeper leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Once it starts, there's no stopping it. You'll have to cut it, you'll have to burn it, but nothing works. The hair, it's only the beginning. It's what happens next that'll really get to you. The old man's words were cryptic, but her father didn't care to hear anymore. He turned and left the shop, the doll still clutched in his hands. When he returned home, Emily was waiting for him, sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were wide with fear, and the air in the house seemed oppressive, as if something unseen was pressing down on them both. "I don't understand it," her father said, dropping the doll onto the table. "I went to the store, to an antique shop. They all said the same thing. It's not just a toy. Something's wrong with it. They think it's cursed." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Cursed?" Her father looked at her, his face drawn with worry. "I don't know, honey, but whatever it is, it's getting worse. We need to get rid of it once and for all." But the next morning, the doll's hair was longer than it had ever been before, so long that it trailed behind the doll like a dark, flowing river. It was no longer just a doll. It had become something else, something that was pushing into their lives, taking over their home. The whispers continued at night, growing louder, more insistent. At times, Emily thought she could hear a faint voice calling her name, but when she would turn to look, the room would be empty. Her parents, too, seemed to be hearing things. Her mother would wake in the middle of the night, eyes wide with fear, convinced that someone or something was watching them from the corners of the room. But it wasn't just the whispers. It was the way the doll's hair seemed to move, to shift of its own accord. The strands would slither across the floor, stretching and twisting like serpents. At times, it felt as though the doll itself was growing, swelling, feeding on the very air in the room. The family couldn't take it anymore. The house, once a place of warmth and comfort, had become a prison. The doll had taken control, and no matter how many times they tried to cut its hair, it always came back, longer, thicker, darker. Emily couldn't sleep. She would lie awake at night, staring at the doll on her nightstand, its eyes glinting in the dark, its hair moving of its own volition. It was as though it were waiting for something. And then one evening, as her father sat in the living room, examining the doll once again, something terrifying happened. The doll's hair began to move on its own, curling and twisting in the air like it had a life of its own. It swirled around Emily's father, wrapping itself around his arms and neck, tighter and tighter, till he gasped for breath. In a moment of panic, Emily grabbed the doll and hurled it across the room. The hair fell still, but the damage had been done. Her father was choking, his face turning purple as he struggled to break free from the coil of hair. Emily ran to him, trying to help, but the hair was like a vice, refusing to release him. Her mother rushed in, pulling at the strands with all her strength, but they were too strong. Finally, in one last, desperate attempt, her mother seized a knife from the kitchen and cut through the strands of hair, freeing her husband. But as soon as the hair was severed, it began to grow back at an impossible speed. "Where is it coming from?" Emily whispered, horrified. And then, in the silence that followed, her father noticed something strange. The scalp of the doll, where the hair had once been, had opened, revealing something underneath. a hidden cavity, a layer of flesh that was not porcelain. Beneath the skin was a strange pulsating tissue, like the flesh of a living creature. It was as if the doll had been hiding something, something far more terrible than anyone had imagined. Emily recoiled in fear, her heart racing in her chest. Her mother, too, gasped, her hand covering her mouth in disbelief. The room seemed to spin as if reality itself was shifting beneath their feet. And then, through the crack in the doll's scalp, something began to emerge, something small, something that was not human, but was far too close to it. The thing that emerged from the doll's scalp was unlike anything they had ever seen. At first, it appeared to be a small, pale shape, almost like a finger, twisting its way out of the flesh of the doll. It was slick with some kind of blackish fluid, as if it had been hidden within the doll all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. But then, as the creature grew, they saw that it wasn't just a single appendage. It was something far darker. The skin that had been hidden beneath the doll's porcelain exterior was rippling and stretching, as if the doll were a living organism and something within it was alive. Emily's scream echoed through the room as the creature pushed itself further out. It was like a malformed, grotesque version of a human, but its features were distorted, its face warped and contorted as though it had been pieced together from mismatched parts. Its limbs were thin and spindly, the skin stretched tight over bones that seemed too fragile for its size, and the hair, Emily's eyes widened in horror, was the same as the doll's, long and twisted, dark and thick. It moved like the hair of a living thing, almost as if it were sentient. Her father stumbled back, his eyes wide in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. His mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out. The thing continued to slither from the doll's head, its body becoming more and more solid until it stood before them, a nightmarish creature, half human, half doll, and completely unnatural. The air in the room grew thick with dread, suffocating them, making it hard to breathe. The creature's eyes flickered open, and they were the same deep blue as the doll's, lifeless and cold. There was no warmth, no humanity behind them, only the hollow emptiness of something that should not exist. It tilted its head as if studying them, its body swaying like a puppet, controlled by strings. Emily's mother stepped forward, trembling, her voice barely a whisper. "What is it? What have we done?" The creature made a low guttural sound, a noise that seemed to vibrate the very walls of the room. It raised a hand, fingers long and sharp like claws, and gestured toward the doll. The hair, still writhing and growing, reached out like tendrils, wrapping itself around the legs of the family, pulling them toward the creature. Emily tried to pull back, but the hair seemed to have a life of its own, dragging her closer to the thing that had once been a doll. "Stop!" her father shouted, but the words were useless. The air was thick with something darker, a force they could not understand, and their bodies refused to obey. The hair pulled them forward, closer to the thing, and they felt the heat of its presence burning into their skin. The creature's mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth that seemed to gleam in the dim light. It began to laugh, a sound that wasn't a laugh at all, but something far more sinister, like the sound of broken glass scraping against stone. The walls seemed to close in around them, the room growing colder with every passing second. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the pressure of the hair tightening around her limbs as though it were trying to bind her to the creature. And then, just when it seemed like they could no longer escape, something changed. The doll's hair, once so dark and twisted, began to unravel. Slowly at first, then faster, until it was spiraling upward as if being sucked back into the doll's scalp. The creature's form began to tremble, its body flickering like a flame caught in the wind. Emily and her family stumbled back, their feet finally able to move, their bodies freed from the grip of the hair. "What's happening?" her mother gasped, looking around in confusion. Emily's father grabbed her by the arm, pulling her toward the door. "We have to get out of here now." The creature let out a sound like a hiss, and the room seemed to darken, the very air becoming suffocating. The doll's hair continued to writhe, but now it was pulling itself back into the head of the doll as though trying to retreat into whatever dark space it had come from. The family ran through the hallway, the floorboards creaking under their feet, the house feeling like it was alive, shifting and twisting around them. Behind them, they could hear the sound of the creature's growls, the walls echoing with its rage. But as they reached the front door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. "No!" her father shouted, throwing himself against the door. But it wouldn't budge. The house seemed to be alive with energy, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Emily could hear the whispers again, louder now, echoing in her mind, the words unintelligible but filled with malice. Suddenly, a crash came from behind them. Emily whipped around, her heart stopping in her chest. The doll, now back on the table, was no longer just a doll. Its eyes were wide open, staring at them with an intensity that made her blood run cold. The creature had retreated back into the doll, but it had left something behind, a presence, a darkness that filled the room. "Get out!" Emily screamed. "It's not over." Her father, still struggling with the door, looked up at her, his face filled with panic. "We need to get out now." But the house wouldn't let them go. The walls seemed to close in around them, the air thick with a malevolent presence. The doll sat quietly on the table, its eyes now fixed on them, its hair still, as though waiting for the next moment to strike. Then, as Emily's father finally broke through the door, a final chilling sound filled the air, the sound of a baby crying. But the sound wasn't coming from the doll. It was coming from behind them, from the room they had just left. They turned, their hearts stopping in unison as they saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was small, fragile, with a face they recognized, a face they had once known. But the figure wasn't human. It was the creature, transformed into a baby-like form, its features still distorted, its eyes still hollow, but now it had something new. A mouth, a voice, something that sounded like a cry, but with a deep, inhuman echo. And as it stepped forward, its feet barely touching the ground, the room seemed to pulse with life. The doll's hair, once again beginning to grow, coiling around the family, pulling them back into the darkness. In a final, desperate attempt to escape, Emily's mother grabbed a knife from the table and lunged at the creature. The baby-like form writhed, its face twisting in pain as the blade sank into its chest. The creature screamed, its form flickering and twisting as it collapsed into the doll, and then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature was gone. The doll lay on the floor, its hair still, its eyes closed. The house fell silent. They stood there, panting, their bodies trembling from the terror that had gripped them. But as the seconds passed, they realized something. The house was no longer alive. The oppressive, suffocating presence was gone. The doll, now just a doll once more, lay harmless on the floor, its hair still and lifeless. But Emily could never forget the eyes, the cold, hollow eyes that would haunt her for the rest of her life, and the whispers, faint but always lingering in the back of her mind, telling her that it was never truly over. The doll, whatever it had been banished for now, but something told her it would return. It was waiting, biding its time, just like before. And deep down, Emily knew there would always be more hair,